The ground shook beneath Cole's boots as another explosion lit up the sky above Prime. Dust and debris rained down on his helmet while he pressed himself against the broken wall of what had once been a building. His squad was scattered somewhere behind him, their voices crackling through his radio in fragments of panic and commands. They were losing this fight, and everyone knew it. Was a medic, not a soldier in the true sense. He carried a weapon like everyone else, but his real tools were the bandages and medicines in his pack. In 3 years of war against he had saved more lives with his hands than he ever took with his rifle. That was the only thing that let him sleep at night when the memories came flooding back. They were winning on this planet. Their forces had pushed the human lines back kilometer by kilometer over the past week. Now the order had come through to retreat to the extraction point. Started moving, keeping low, his eyes scanning the destruction around him for any sign of his squad mates. That was when he saw the smoke rising from the valley below. A transport vessel had crashed into the rocky ground, its hull torn open like a wounded animal. The ship was small, not a military craft but something civilian. Knew he should keep moving. The extraction shuttle would not wait forever, and this planet would soon belong entirely to the enemy. But something made him stop, something made him look closer. He saw movement inside the wreckage. Cursed under his breath and started down the slope. His radio crackled with his squad leader's voice demanding to know his position. He did not answer. His boots slipped on loose rocks as he half ran and half slid toward the crashed vessel. The smoke was getting thicker, and he could smell fuel burning somewhere inside the twisted metal. When he reached the transport, he had to squeeze through a gap in the hull. The interior was dark and filled with sparks from damaged systems. Bodies lay strapped into seats. Adults who had not survived the impact felt no satisfaction at the sight. Dead was dead, no matter the species. Then he heard the sound, a small voice crying out in a language he did not understand. He found her trapped beneath a section of collapsed ceiling. A child, her purple skin covered in dust and blood, her large dark eyes wide with terror. She could not have been more than 6 years old in human terms. One of her legs was pinned and she was too weak to free herself. His radio crackled again. This time the message was clear. Extraction in 15 minutes. Anyone not at the shuttle would be left behind. He looked at the child. She looked back at him. In her eyes he saw the same fear he had seen in human children when the bombs fell on his home colony, the same desperate hope that someone would come to help. Knelt down and began working to free her leg. The ceiling piece was heavy, but he managed to lift it enough to pull her out. She screamed in pain when he moved her, and he winced at the sound. Her leg was badly broken, and she had other injuries he could not fully assess in the darkness. He pulled out his medical kit and did what he could. He set the bone as gently as possible, gave her something for the pain, and wrapped the wound tight. The child watched him the entire time. She had stopped crying, but her breathing was shallow and fast. When he finished, she reached out and touched his face with her small fingers, tracing the strange features of this alien creature who had not left her to die. Picked her up carefully, cradling her against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. He started walking. The extraction point was 3 kilometers away through enemy territory. The forces were everywhere, searching the battlefield for survivors and stragglers. Moved through the shadows and ruins like a ghost, holding the child close whenever she made a sound. Twice he had to hide while patrols passed within meters of his position. Both times the child stayed silent, as if she understood. His legs burned and his lungs ached. The child grew heavier with every step, but he did not put her down. He could not. Something inside him refused to let this small life end on this broken planet just because their species were at war. The sun was setting when he finally saw the walls of the neutral medical outpost. The Galactic Council had established these sanctuaries on many war worlds, places where both sides could bring their wounded without fear of attack. It was the only safe place could think of. He stumbled through the gates just as his strength finally gave out. Doctors and nurses rushed toward him, their voices a blur of concern and confusion. Someone tried to take the child from his arms, but he held on for a moment longer, making sure she was still breathing, making sure she was alive. Then the darkness took him, and he collapsed onto the cold ground. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on a medical bed. The outpost's white ceiling stared down at him, and for a moment he thought he was safe. Then he turned his head and saw the soldiers standing at every door and window. They had surrounded the facility. A human doctor named Samuel Park leaned over him with worry on his face. He explained in a quiet voice that the child had saved was not just any. She was the daughter of Fleet Commander Eth, one of the most powerful military leaders in the entire empire. The commander herself was on her way to the outpost, and no one knew what would happen when she arrived. Lay still and listened to the sounds of voices outside. He thought about his sister back on Earth and wondered if he would ever see her again. He thought about the child he had carried through fire and whether saving her life would cost him his own. But when he closed his eyes, he did not regret what he had done. War had taken so much from him already. His parents, his friends, his faith in the future. He refused to let it take his humanity too. The doors of the medical outpost opened and the room fell silent. Looked up to see a tall female standing in the entrance. Her armor was black and gold. Her eyes burned with emotions he could not name, and every soldier in the room bowed their heads in her presence. Fleet Commander Eth had come for her daughter. And now she stood staring at the human who had saved her. Forced himself to sit up on the medical bed despite the pain in his exhausted body. Every soldier in the room had their weapons ready and their eyes fixed on him. He was one human surrounded by enemies, and he knew that his life now depended on the female standing in the doorway. Fleet Commander Eth walked toward him with slow and measured steps. She was taller than him by at least a head, her purple skin darker than her daughter's, her features sharp and angular like a blade. The medals on her armor told the story of 100 battles and 1,000 victories. This was a warrior who had spent years fighting his kind and could see no mercy in her eyes. She stopped an arm's length away from him and studied his face in silence. The entire room held its breath. Did not look away. He had done what he believed was right and he would not apologize for it. If this was where his life ended, then at least he would face death without shame. An officer stepped forward. His name was Han, and he served as Eth's second in command. His voice was harsh when he spoke. This human is a soldier of the enemy forces. He should be taken prisoner and interrogated for military information, or better yet, executed here as a message to his people. Eth raised one hand and Han immediately fell silent. She continued to stare at, and he could see something shifting behind her cold expression. Something that looked almost like confusion. "You saved my daughter," she said. Her voice was deep and carried the weight of authority. "The doctors have told me what you did. You found her in the wreckage of a transport that was shot down by your own forces. You treated her wounds with your own medical supplies. You carried her through 3 kilometers of hostile territory while your people were retreating." Nodded slowly, "That is what happened." "Why?" Eth demanded. "Why would a human risk his life to save a child? You had nothing to gain. You could have left her to die and no one would have known." Thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Because she was a child," he said simply. "Because she was hurt and scared and alone. That is the only reason I needed." Eth's hands tightened into fists at her sides, saw the conflict raging inside her. This was a female who had lost 2 sons to human weapons. Her mate had died in battle against human forces 5 years ago. She had every reason to hate his species with every fiber of her being. And yet here she stood, facing the human who had saved the only child she had left. Han spoke again, his tone impatient. "Commander, we cannot show weakness to the enemy. The High Council will expect this human to be punished. If word spreads that you allowed him to go free simply because he showed mercy to your authority will be questioned." Eth turned her head slightly toward her officer. Her voice was ice. "Do you presume to lecture me on matters of authority, Han? I was commanding fleets while you were still learning to hold a weapon." Han lowered his head, but his jaw remained tight with frustration. Eth turned back to. She seemed to be wrestling with a decision that went against everything she had believed for years. When she finally spoke, her words were heavy with the weight of ancient tradition. "Among my people, we follow a code called the Ra. It is older than our empire and more sacred than any law. The Ra states that when someone saves your life or the life of your blood, you carry a debt that must be honored above all other obligations, above duty, above war, above hatred itself." She paused and let the words sink in. "You saved my daughter's life, human. By the Ra, I am bound to protect yours in return. This is not a choice I make willingly. It is an obligation I cannot escape." The soldiers in the room exchanged shocked glances. Han looked like he wanted to protest again, but he did not dare speak. Eth raised her voice so everyone could hear. "This human is under my protection. Anyone who harms him will answer to me personally. This is my command and it will not be questioned. Released a breath he had not realized he was holding. He was not going to die today, but he could see from the faces around him that his survival had created a political storm that would not end easily. Eth gestured for her soldiers to stand down. Then she looked at once more. Do not mistake this for friendship, human. I still hate your kind for what you have taken from me. My sons are dead because of your people. My mate is dead. I have spent years dreaming of the day when humanity would pay for its crimes. She leaned closer and her voice dropped to a whisper. But my daughter is alive because of you, and I am not yet so consumed by hatred that I would dishonor the code that has guided my people for 10,000 years. A commotion at the door interrupted them. Looked past Eth and saw doctors wheeling a small bed into the room. Lying on the bed with bandages wrapped around her leg was the child he had saved. Was awake and her large dark eyes were searching the room. When she spotted, her face lit up with recognition. Mother, she called out in heavily accented but understandable human language. That is him. That is the one who carried me. Eth turned to her daughter, and for the first time saw the warrior's expression soften. She moved to the child's side and took her small hand gently. I know, little one, I know. Looked at again. He was kind to me. He told me stories while we walked through the dark. He said everything would be okay, and it was. Remembered those desperate hours moving through the ruins. He had talked to the child constantly just to keep her calm and keep himself focused. He did not know she had understood his words. Eth looked at over her shoulder. Her eyes were still hard, but something had changed in them, something small and fragile that she was trying very hard not to show. Reached out her free hand toward. She smiled, and it was a beautiful thing, innocent and trusting despite the war raging around them. Hesitated, then he stepped forward and took the child's hand in his own. Eth watched them in silence. Han and the other soldiers watched too. And in that moment, something shifted in the universe, something that would change the course of the war in ways no one could yet imagine. Thank you, said softly. Thank you for saving me. Smiled back at her. You are welcome, he said. Eth straightened and composed herself once more. She gave orders for to be taken to her flagship as an honored guest rather than a prisoner. The Ra demanded he remain until the life debt was satisfied. As the soldiers moved to escort him, Eth spoke one final time. You have complicated everything, human. I hope you understand what you have done. Looked at the child still holding his hand. Then he looked at the mother who wanted to hate him but could not. I only did what was right, he said. I would do it again. Eth did not respond, but as was led away, he saw her close her eyes briefly. And he thought he saw the faintest crack in the armor she had built around her heart. The flagship's sovereign heart was larger than any vessel had ever seen. It stretched across the void of space like a floating city, home to thousands of warriors and their families. When the shuttle brought him aboard, he felt like a small fish that had somehow ended up in the territory of sharks. His quarters were simple but comfortable. A sleeping area, a small bathroom, a window that looked out at the stars. It was better than a prison cell, but understood that he was not truly free. The Ra kept him bound to this place until Eth decided the life debt had been satisfied. No one could tell him how long that might take. The first weeks were difficult. The crew made no secret of their hatred for him. They stared at him with cold eyes in the corridors. They whispered insults when he passed. More than once, found his food had been tampered with or his door had been locked from the outside. 3 times, someone tried to kill him. The first attempt came from a young warrior whose brother had died fighting humans. He attacked in a storage room with a blade and nearly succeeded before Eth's guards pulled him away. The second attempt was poison slipped into his water supply. The third was a bomb hidden in his quarters that only failed because of a faulty timer. Each time, Eth punished the attacker severely. She made it clear that the Ra was sacred and that anyone who violated it would face her personal judgment. The punishments were harsh enough that the assassination attempts eventually stopped, but the hatred remained. Spent most of his time alone, reading whatever materials the ship's computer would translate for him, exercising in his small room and thinking about home. His sister was probably worried sick. His commanding officer, a woman named Myra Santos, had surely reported him as missing in action by now. Then one day, everything changed. He was sitting by his window watching the stars when the door to his quarters opened without warning. Jumped to his feet expecting another attack. Instead, he found himself looking down at The child stood in his doorway with her legs still wrapped in healing bandages and a curious expression on her face. Behind her, a nervous guard watched from the corridor but made no move to stop her. "Hello," said in her careful human words, "can I come in?" Was so surprised he simply nodded, walked into his room and looked around with the open curiosity of a child exploring somewhere new. She examined his few possessions, touched the glass of his window, and then sat down on the floor as if she belonged there. "My mother says you are strange," told him. "She says humans are dangerous and cannot be trusted, but you saved me, so I think she is wrong about you." Sat down across from her. He did not know what to say to this small person who had somehow decided he was worth visiting. "Why did you come here?" he asked. Shrugged her thin shoulders. "I was bored. Everyone on this ship treats me like I am made of glass since the crash. They will not let me play or run or do anything fun. I thought maybe you would be different." Could not help but smile. "What do you want to do?" Thought about it. "Teach me something human, something fun." So taught her a simple game from his childhood. It involved clapping hands in patterns and singing a silly song. Laughed when she made mistakes and demanded to try again when she got it right. For a brief moment, forgot that he was a prisoner on an enemy ship. He was just a man playing a game with a child. That was how Eth found them. She appeared in the doorway without warning and froze. Expected anger or disapproval. Instead, he saw something else on the commander's face. Something that looked almost like wonder. "What are you doing?" Eth asked quietly. "He is teaching me a human game," explained happily. "It is called patty cake. Look, I can do it without making mistakes now." She demonstrated proudly while her mother watched. When she finished, looked up at Eth with the innocent hope of a child seeking approval. Eth's expression softened in a way had only seen once before. "That is very good," she said gently, "but you should not bother our guest. He needs his rest." Protested but eventually agreed to leave. Before she went, she turned back to, "Can I come again tomorrow?" Looked at Eth. The commander hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, told, you can come again tomorrow." After the child left with her guard, Eth remained in the doorway. She studied for a long moment. "She has not laughed like that since before the war," Eth said finally. "Since before her brothers died and her father was killed. I had begun to think I would never hear that sound again." Did not know how to respond. Eth continued. "You confuse me, human. My people have taught me that your kind are monsters who deserve only destruction. But you saved my daughter, and now you make her laugh. These things do not fit together in my mind." "Maybe your people were wrong about us," offered carefully. Eth's eyes hardened briefly. "My sons are still dead. My mate is still gone. Do not ask me to forget that." "I'm not asking you to forget," said. "I'm asking you to consider that perhaps war has made both our peoples forget some things too. Things like mercy, things like kindness, things like seeing each other as people instead of enemies." Eth was silent for a long time. Then she spoke again and her voice was heavy. "The bombed your home colony. We killed your parents. I read your file. You have more reason to hate us than almost any human alive, and yet you saved without a moment of hesitation. Why?" Thought about his answer carefully. "Because hate is a poison," he said finally. "I have seen what it does to people. It eats them from the inside until there is nothing left but anger and pain. I decided a long time ago that I would not let it consume me. When I saw your daughter trapped in that wreckage, I did not see I saw a child who needed help. That was enough." Eth stared at him. Something in her expression was changing, cracking open like ice melting in spring. Before she could respond, her communication device buzzed with an urgent message. She listened and her face grew troubled. "The High Council has been informed of your presence on my ship," she told. "They are not pleased. A representative is coming to discuss your fate." "What does that mean?" asked. Eth met his eyes. "It means that your life has become a political matter, and political matters rarely end well for anyone." She turned and left without another word, but had seen the conflict in her eyes. And he had seen something else too, something that gave him hope. Eth no longer looked at him like an enemy. She looked at him like a problem she did not know how to solve, and that thought was a beginning. Eth arrived on the Sovereign Heart with a fleet of escort vessels and an expression of cold authority. He was older than Eth, his purple skin marked with the ritual scars of 100 political victories, his eyes calculating and merciless. watched from a viewing window as the shuttle docked with the flagship and felt a chill run through him. This was the male who wanted him dead. Eth had warned to stay in his quarters during this visit, but word traveled quickly on a ship full of gossip. Learned that Eth led the war faction on the High Council. He believed that the conflict with humanity should continue until one species was completely destroyed. The idea of honoring a life debt to a human disgusted him. For 2 days, waited and worried, continued to visit him, unaware of the danger gathering around them both. She taught him words and he taught her more human games. They drew pictures together and shared stories about their homes. Found himself growing genuinely fond of the child and dreading what might happen to their strange friendship. On the 3rd day, guards came to escort him to the command center. The room was large and imposing, filled with screens showing tactical data and star maps. Eth stood at the center with his hands clasped behind his back. Eth stood nearby with Han at her side. Other officers and politicians filled the remaining space, all watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to hatred. Eth spoke first, his voice echoed through the chamber. So this is the human that has caused such trouble. A simple medic who somehow convinced Fleet Commander Eth to violate every principle of our war effort. Tell me, human, what trick did you use to deceive her? I used no trick, replied calmly. I saved a child from dying, that is all. Eth's lip curled in contempt. The Ra was created to govern relationships between. It was never intended to protect alien vermin. Commander Eth has allowed sentiment to cloud her judgment. This mistake must be corrected. Eth stepped forward. Her voice was steady but could see the tension in her shoulders. The Ra makes no distinction between species. Hi. The code is absolute. I am bound by my honor to protect this human, and I will not betray that bond. Then your honor is a weakness, Eth snapped. Our people are at war. Thousands of warriors die every cycle fighting these humans, and you would shelter one of them on your ship like a pet. Do you think the families of our dead soldiers would approve of this arrangement? The question hung in the air like a blade. Saw several officers nodding in agreement with his words. Han surprised everyone by speaking. Hi, I once shared your view of this situation. I believe the commander was making a grave error by honoring the Ra for an enemy, but I have watched this human for weeks now. He has shown courage, dignity, and kindness that I did not expect from his kind. Ed's eyes narrowed. You dare defend him as well, Han. Have you all lost your minds? I defend the code, Han replied firmly. If we abandon the Ra when it becomes inconvenient, then what are we fighting for? Our principles are what separate us from chaos. The human saved the commander's daughter. That truth cannot be erased simply because it makes us uncomfortable. Murmurs spread through the assembled officers. Could see the political ground shifting beneath Eth's feet. There was losing control of the room. Eth raised his hand for silence. Enough. I did not come here to debate philosophy. I came here with orders from the High Council. The human will be surrendered to our custody. He will be transported to thee and publicly executed as a demonstration of our resolve. This matter is no longer subject to discussion. Eth did not move. Her eyes locked with Eth's across the room. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner. No. The single word sent shockwaves through the chamber. Eth's face flushed with anger. You refuse a direct order from the High Council. I refuse to dishonor the Ra, Eth replied. The code has guided our people for 10,000 years. It has survived wars, plagues, and the fall of empires. I will not be the one to break it for political convenience. The doors to the command center opened and walked in. His heart sank. The child should not be here. She should be somewhere safe, away from this confrontation that could turn violent at any moment, but moved through the crowd of adults with the fearless confidence of youth. She walked straight to and took his hand. This human is good, announced in a clear voice that everyone could hear. He saved my life when he did not have to. He carried me when he was tired. He told me stories when I was scared. I do not understand why you want to hurt him. Every eye in the room turned to the child. In culture, had learned, children were considered pure truth speakers. Their words carried weight because they had not yet learned to lie or manipulate. Eth tried to respond, but found himself struggling against the simple honesty of a child's testimony. Continued, my father died because of humans. My brothers died because of humans. I know this, but did not kill them, saved me. Are we supposed to punish someone for being kind? The room was completely silent. Eth placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Then she looked at Eth and made her decision. "This human has become part of my household," she announced formally. "By the ancient rights of adoption and protection, I claim him as a member of my family. He is no longer simply under the Ra. He is one of us." Gasps echoed through the chamber. This was unprecedented. No alien had ever been adopted into a noble house. Eth's voice shook with rage. "You have gone mad. The council will never recognize this." "Then let the council challenge me," Eth replied coldly. "Let them try to take him from my house by force. They will find that I am not easily moved." She turned to address the entire room. "For 3 years we have fought humanity with every weapon we possess. We have won battles and lost battles. We have buried our dead and mourned our losses. But we have never stopped to ask if there might be another way." She gestured toward. This human risked everything to save a child he had every reason to hate. Perhaps that is not weakness. Perhaps it is strength we have forgotten how to recognize. Eth took a deep breath. "I propose that we use this human as a bridge. Let him carry our message to his people. Let us offer negotiations instead of more war. Let us see if peace is possible before we commit ourselves to destruction." Eth laughed bitterly. "Peace with humans? You truly have lost your mind." But other voices in the room were murmuring differently now. Saw officers exchanging thoughtful glances. He saw the seeds of doubt being planted in minds that had only known war. Squeezed his hand tightly and realized that everything had changed. The path to peace had just opened by the smallest crack. But sometimes that was all it took. The neutral station called Concordance hung in the empty space between star systems, far from the battle lines where human and forces still faced each other with weapons ready. It had taken 3 months of careful diplomacy just to arrange this meeting. 3 months of arguments and threats and near disasters that almost ended the fragile possibility of peace before it could begin. Stood in the preparation room and tried to calm his racing heart. In a few minutes, he would walk into a chamber filled with representatives from both species. He would stand between two peoples who had spent years killing each other, and he would try to find words that might convince them to stop. Eth entered the room behind him. She wore her formal armor but had left her weapons at the door. It was a sign of trust that Nu had cost her dearly. "Are you ready?" she asked. Shook his head. "No, but I do not think I ever will be, so we might as well begin." Eth almost smiled. "You have learned to think like a warrior human." "I have had a good teacher," replied. They walked together through the corridors of the station. Human guards and guards watched them pass with suspicion in their eyes, saw hands resting on weapons, bodies tense with the expectation of violence. Trust was a fragile thing, and it had not yet taken root here. The negotiation chamber was a large circular room with seats arranged in curved rows on either side. Humans sat on one half, on the other. Recognized his former commanding officer Myra Santos near the front of the human delegation. She looked older than he remembered, worn down by years of war. Near her sat Ambassador Hayes, the official representative chosen to speak for humanity. On the side, Eth sat with his faction members, their expressions hostile and closed. But other had come as well, moderates who were willing to at least listen to what might be said today. Hand sat among them, his presence a sign that even former enemies could change their minds. In the center of the room, between the two delegations, stood a small raised platform. Walked to it alone and felt every eye in the chamber focus on him. He took a deep breath and began. "My name is Cole. I am a medic who served in the United Earth Defense Corps. 3 years ago, I found a child trapped in the wreckage of a crashed transport. I could have left her there to die. Instead, I saved her life." He paused to let the words settle. "I did not save her because I thought it would lead to this moment. I did not save her because I wanted peace or political change. I saved her because she was a child who needed help, nothing more and nothing less." Looked at the human side of the room. "For 3 years I have heard that they are monsters. I have heard that they feel nothing, that they value nothing, that they want only to destroy us. I believed these things myself for a long time." Then he turned to the side. "And I know that your people have heard the same about us, that humans are cruel and savage, that we cannot be trusted or reasoned with, that we deserve only extinction." He spread his hands. "I am here to tell you that both sides are wrong." Murmurs rippled through the chamber but continued. "For weeks I lived aboard a warship as a guest of Fleet Commander Eth. I watched her command her crew with honor and discipline. I played games with her daughter and heard her laugh with joy. I saw warriors risk their own positions to defend a code of ethics they believed in. He met Ed's eyes across the room, and I saw a mother who had lost almost everything still find room in her heart for mercy, not because it was easy, not because she wanted to, but because she believed that some things mattered more than hatred. Eth rose from her seat and walked to stand beside on the platform. The room fell completely silent. She spoke, and her voice carried to every corner. I have spent my life fighting humans. I have watched my mate die at their hands. I have buried 2 of my children because of this war. When I learned that a human had saved my daughter, I wanted to believe it was a trick. I wanted to find some hidden motive that would let me continue hatting as I always had. She looked at beside her. But there was no trick. There was only a man who saw a child in danger and chose to help. That simple act destroyed everything I thought I knew about his species, and it forced me to ask questions I had been avoiding for years. Eth turned to face both delegations. Why are we fighting this war? What do we hope to gain? Is the death of more children, ours and theirs, truly worth whatever victory might eventually come? I no longer have answers to these questions. I only know that I am tired of burying the young. A commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Walked into the chamber, escorted by guards who had clearly tried and failed to keep her away. She moved through the crowded room until she reached the platform where her mother and stood. Then she did something unexpected. She took his hand in one of hers, and she reached out her other hand toward Ambassador Hayes. The human diplomat stared at the child's outstretched fingers. The entire room held its breath. Slowly, carefully, Hayes rose from her seat. She walked to the platform and took the small purple hand offered to her. Smiled up at both adults. See, she said simply, it is not so hard. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a sound began somewhere in the room. Realized it was laughter. Quiet at first, then growing. Not mocking laughter, but something warmer. Something that released the tension that had been building for so long. The negotiations that followed were not easy. There were arguments that lasted hours. There were moments when delegates stormed out in anger and had to be convinced to return. There were accusations and old wounds reopened and painful truths that both sides struggled to accept. But in the end, they reached an agreement. A ceasefire would begin immediately. Prisoner exchanges would follow. A framework for permanent peace would be discussed in future sessions. It was not everything, but it was a beginning. When the chamber finally emptied, found himself alone on the observation deck of the station. Stars filled the viewport before him, countless points of light in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, the fleets that had been preparing to destroy each other were now standing down. Eth joined him at the window. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while. You have changed history today, she said finally. A single act of mercy 3 years ago has led to this moment. Millions of lives may be saved because you refused to let one child die. Shook his head. I did not do this alone. You made the choice to honor the Ra when it would have been easier to ignore it. You stood against your own counsel. You risked everything for a principle. Eth was quiet for a moment. Perhaps we saved each other then. You saved my daughter, and in doing so, you saved something in me that I thought had been lost forever. Small footsteps approached behind them. Appeared and wedged herself between the 2 adults, looking out at the stars with wonder in her young eyes. She said, will you teach me more human games now that the fighting is stopping? Smiled down at her. I will teach you as many as you want. Grinned, good, and maybe someday I can visit Earth. I want to see your sky and your oceans and all the things you told me about. Felt something tighten in his chest. It was hope, he realized, real hope for the first time in years. Maybe someday you will, he said. Maybe someday we all will visit each other's worlds, not as enemies, just as people. Eth placed her hand on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than words could express. Thank you, she said quietly, for saving my daughter, for saving us all. Looked at the stars, at the child beside him, at the warrior who had become something like a friend. And he knew that the universe had changed. One act of compassion at a time.